Hi everyone, welcome to the Communication Conflict YouTube channel promoting mindful communication, growth through conflict. And this is also a podcast under the name Chaos, C-A-O-S, on Anchor.fm and in iTunes. So today I want to talk a bit more about bullying, or the idea of bullying in workplaces, and I'm calling this video and podcast The Illusion of Bullying and the Reality of Harassment. So why do I make that distinction? First of all, because I say the reality of harassment because harassment is legally defined under law, and I'm talking here about UK based policies and procedures and legislation, etc. Although much of it is reflected in other English speaking countries and possibly a lot of non-English speaking countries as well, but I don't speak many other languages, so I don't know. But America, Australia, Canada, many of these other countries have very similar legislation to the UK. So what I'm saying refers to UK-based definitions, but as I say, you'll probably find it similar in other countries as well. Certainly, the approach to bullying is very similar across the world, and across the world also it doesn't work as an approach, and I want to try to kind of highlight many of the reasons why that is. Even though many things look like it should work, it is the very structures that are applied which just cannot work in any of the situations where it's attempted to apply. So things look on the outside like there's lots of structures in place, but they don't work. And rather than look at the structures and change them, often there's a suggestion that perhaps just more willingness or more commitment or more money should be put into trying to make them work, but they never will work. So I want to talk today a bit more about why. So the reality of harassment is legally defined. Therefore, it's not a straightforward and simple experience. It's a very difficult experience for people involved, but it's much easier to prove that harassment has occurred because there needs to be an objective witnessing and evidencing of someone having used a derogatory term about someone on the basis of a protected characteristic, so maybe reference to their gender or their sexuality or their religion or their race or disability or other protected characteristics, which you can find the list in your local country, if you want to know what all the different protected characteristics are. But it will be a comment based on that aspect of their identity rather than about the individual. So therefore it's discriminatory on the basis of that protected characteristic. So therefore that's illegal, and understandably so, because we want to try to kind of remove suggestions of racism and sexism and prejudice based on protected characteristics of people in our societies, and so it's entirely understandable, and it is objectively defined under law. Contrast that with bullying, which is not about reference to protected characteristics. It's about relationships between people, even though often it's interpreted as being a one-way thing. When you look into what constitutes bullying situations that are not harassment or not violence, which also would be illegal, or other gross misconduct, but kind of difficult relationships which have become quite extreme and quite difficult, but still don't become harassment. In those situations, it's about a relationship, but often the accusation is of bullying by one person towards another. Now, a lot of people who've experienced bullying will perhaps not feel comfortable with me saying that, but the reason I say that is because there is no definition of bullying that is objective, unlike for harassment. So the phraseology that's used in any of the many, and I mean many, different definitions of bullying are always subject to subjective interpretation. So it means that one person if one person says a particular thing to another person, that other person may feel that they're being bullied, but the other person may feel they were joking. A witness may feel that it's bullying, another witness might feel that it's joking and it's banter. In some situations, people won't feel it's bullying at all, even while another person does. So there's never one way of establishing a true interpretation of the thing that's happened. And as a consequence, it's the reason I describe it as illusion is that it's kind of like a ghost. Someone may feel that they've seen it, but trying to prove it to someone else is impossible, because again, one person may say, "Oh yeah, you definitely saw a ghost. It must be a ghost because of what you said." But another person will say, "What are you talking about? There is no such thing as a ghost." And there will never be a way of proving it. So the person who has experienced that difficulty in their workplace situation, when they try to say it's bullying, they will almost always end up with a sense that people aren't believing them or haven't listened to them or don't take them seriously. And they'll then say that people don't care or people are against them, but the point is that if people are needing this proof that bullying has occurred, it's never going to be possible to prove that. But it doesn't mean to say that someone might have not have had a very difficult experience. And when I talk a little bit later about mediation and conflict coaching and particular management approaches, effective ways of responding to situations that people sometimes describe as bullying is to not make proving it to be bullying the most important thing. What matters is dealing with the specific actions that have happened in their relationship and looking at how those things can be improved and done differently. But when you try to prove it's bullying first before you take any action, because that's never going to come to a conclusion, it means those changes don't ever come about, because the focus is on proving it to be bullying rather than trying to improve the situation and the working relationship between the people involved. And this is why bullying is used so often, but you never hear that bullying situations get resolved. And it's a kind of particular difficulty. I'm kind of in two places about it, because on the one hand I think it's very sad that there isn't this clarity about how to deal with it when it follows those kinds of approaches, but I'm also very kind of pleased to see that people do manage to resolve bullying allegations through things like mediation. And the differences between the two are that in the first one, in this kind of more procedural approach where it's treated like harassment, as if something can be proven, and that's what I want to focus on at first and come back to mediation later. But the standard kind of journey, and any of you involved in a bullying allegation will recognise, I think, this journey I'm going to describe, is that an allegation is made of bullying, perhaps about an employee, about their boss, but it could be about a colleague as well. It doesn't have to be between a boss and an employee. And the second that happens formally, then what will tend to happen is the management or perhaps the HR team will separate those people, and they will now not be allowed to interact with each other. And that's because it's all made very formal, it's all made very adversarial, it's treated like a kind of almost like a legal investigation, even though, as I say, there won't be any basis on which to do an objective investigation, but it's treated as if you can, and people are kept apart. And the way they're kept apart is often to perhaps move, let's say it is a boss and a team member, but say that the team member will be moved into perhaps another section, and they'll be given work which is probably below their skill level, but it'll be explained as being done because it's like, well, there's an allegation of bullying, so we've got to keep the people apart. But now this person has got an additional problem. Not only are they feeling what they're describing as bullied, but they're also now doing a lower skilled job and they're being separated off from people, so they feel even more bullied, if there is such a definition. Basically, whether it's called bullied or not, they're feeling isolated, they're being treated as if they're not able to do the original role they're employed for. They're given low skill work because it satisfies the need to keep someone separate by moving them out of the team and to do something else. It may also be that the manager is also moved elsewhere sometimes, so sometimes that happens. And there are, despite a lot of people perhaps not acknowledging that actually managers accused of bullying also suffer very odd experiences when the allegation is made about them. A manager might get moved to a different team as well, to avoid there being a coming together of these two people. So you'll notice everything is about keeping people further and further apart. And as that journey starts, what tends to happen is perhaps the employee who's been moved to a lower skilled job starts to feel very stressed, perhaps stops coming in, gets signed off work for stress concerns, maybe physically becomes ill as well, and so is less and less and less in the workplace. Similar things may happen with the manager. The manager may think, why was I moved to a different section? And so they then start questioning their own wishes to come into this work because they're not doing the job they thought they were there for. And either or both of these things could be happening. And similar things if it was two colleagues instead of a boss and an employee. But the point is, it's always about separating people while an investigation is going on. And even though in almost all experiences of investigations in workplaces, those investigations will be inconclusive and there won't be a clear decision, so it is kind of pointless keeping people separated off like this, but people do it simply because that's what the procedure says you've got to do. It will come to no conclusion, and in the bulk of cases one or both of those employees will eventually leave the job. But they won't just leave kind of quietly and go and get another job. There will usually be some kind of claim against the organisation because of it. Perhaps an employment tribunal over wrongful dismissal, or kind of constructive dismissal as well, or through kind of not fulfilling a duty of care. But the crucial thing is it won't be an employment tribunal over allegations of bullying, because an employment tribunal won't hear allegations of bullying. So all these other problems arise because of the approach of the organisation to dealing with the bullying allegation. So it makes it worse and worse and worse and worse. And the whole thing is about separating people more and more and more until eventually it becomes out of the remit of the kind of managing team, perhaps the senior managers of this situation, and into the hands of the legal team. So then it's like, oh, well, we can forget about it now because the legal team's dealing with it. But the point is that what that means is the next time there's a similar incident, exactly the same process will follow, and it will cost tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds in some cases. It will cost tens of thousands of pounds to deal with these things because there's no other approach considered. And often if you look at so there's no intention of trying to restore the working relationship. It's assumed that once there's some kind of formal allegation such as that there's bullying, that it can only move apart, it can never come back together again, which is odd, for want of a better phrase. It's an odd assumption to make, but the systems that are used to deal with such situations are based on the presumption the relationship's broken, so it's about moving things away and away and away, trying to find out someone to be at fault, rarely finding any conclusion about that, and so then kind of basically giving up on the whole thing and just trying to shift the employees out of the organisation or to different parts of the organisation. And obviously there's lots of consequences to that in terms of just how people feel about working there, and also consequences for the people who experience it and don't see it getting resolved, so other team members as well. And so partly why is this happening? Well, one is, as I say, because quite often people only see bullying and harassment as almost the same thing. It's not made clear in policies, and therefore it's not clear in people's minds that they're very, very different things. Bullying is not legally defined, it's a subjectively experienced phenomenon, It's not a very useful concept because it doesn't help people to kind of talk specifically about the problems. Harassment is clearly defined and shouldn't be associated with bullying. It's very clearly defined. It's very much a discriminatory act against people on the basis of a protected characteristic. And so it should be treated very, very differently. But up until a certain point, it's treated exactly the same. Up until, I mean, with harassment, it will at some point be very likely to go on to um, a court environment. Sorry, go to court basically is what I mean, because it is an illegal act. But with bullying, it never will go to court. So it'll only be the side effects of the bullying investigation that end up going to court. It won't be the bullying itself, because it can't, because it's not legally defined. So part of the reason that this occurs is that lack of distinction between the two, but also when you read the policies of many, many organisations, they also don't make a distinction between the two. Some do acknowledge that harassment is illegal. Many don't. I was reading a harassment and bullying and harassment policy. Again, why do we even have the two in the same policy? It should be a policy for allegations of bullying, and even there it'd be better to have a different name for it, perhaps broken working relationships or difficult behaviour at work, and there should be a separate policy for harassment so that everybody's clear they're different. But for some reason it's not done that way. But the policies that do exist about bullying and harassment are so ambiguous, so badly worded, so completely ineffectual for practical application that that the problem persists, and therefore people feel very, very frustrated when they feel bullied, as they would call it, but nothing actually gets done about it. So all the actions will take place as if something's being done about it, but at the end nothing does get done about it because there's no objective basis on which to take action. And this is why almost globally there is no effective response to bullying. And often the argument is it's a lack of commitment by senior management, or there's not enough resourcing put into it. It's not that. A lot of people who feel bullied will say that's the reason. They'll say it's a whitewash. They'll say it's a conspiracy. It's not that. It's just the system is fundamentally flawed and ineffective as a way of dealing with the problem. Now, someone was talking about one of the other videos I've done on this the other day, and and this lady was also a mediator, and one of the things she made very clear was, and it's an entirely appropriate point, is that part of the problem with this approach is it makes the people involved completely passive in the situation. So it's all, the second the allegation is made, somebody else takes over the investigation, the HR team or the management team takes over dealing with it. The two people just sit there wondering what's going on, what's going to happen, living in stress because they just don't know what's going on for the whole duration of the horrible process. And they're playing no part in trying to influence how it can go forward. And the reason that mediation and conflict coaching are so powerful and effective in these situations is because they go back to the people involved in order to try to resolve it. The people who are directly going to have to kind of take things forward if it can get resolved. And it gives voice to both of those people, whether through mediation and they get a chance to come together if they choose to for mediation, or it might be that just one or both choose individually to have conflict coaching. Both of those processes, mediation and conflict coaching, are impartial processes which actively engage and involve the people who are directly involved in the difficulty in creating a different way forward. So whereas the original processes are about keeping people further and further apart until they leave, the whole point about mediation is it's supporting people to come together, but in a way which is designed to support there being a creative and useful and respectful discussion about what's not working and create a new working relationship that can help things to go forward. But for whatever reason, either because people are very uncomfortable around conflict, or because legal teams in some cases have kind of, I don't know, gone too far in the kind of the legalization, the systematization. Not necessarily legal teams, managers as well have gone too far in the systematization of these responses, such that they don't recognize that what they're doing for bullying is never going to work in the same way as it would do for harassment, and it's kind of gone over their heads. But I can't believe that's the case, because this is true globally. For whatever reason, the intention is always to keep people apart, which is a classic ineffective response to conflict, instead of supporting people either individually or together to create a better way forward. So one is like going away from each other. One offers the opportunity to come together. One completely takes the people involved out of the process. They're just kind of passively, waiting for decisions to be made, waiting for assessments of them and the other person to be made. They are passive in the movement forward of the situation. In mediation, people are active. In conflict coaching, people are active in taking the situation forward and improving and creating a different way of dealing with things. And so, in a sense, they're dealing with the reality of the fact that bullying is an illusion. So it is that they're dealing with the fact that just calling the other person a bully all the time isn't going to help them move forward. They need to talk specifically about what the person's doing. If the person shouts at them, they get a chance to say, why do you need to shout at me? You can just talk to me. What means you get like that? It's not acceptable. You don't have to do it that way. If what the person originally is calling bullying is, they're in an open plan office and the person comes up behind them, doesn't talk to them face to face, but leans over their shoulder and keeps pointing out all the problems on their computer screen, and the person feels embarrassed in that open plan office, they can talk and say, look, why don't you sit down next to me? Why can't we go into your office? But don't please do it in an open plan office and do it in a way which feels very belittling and disrespectful towards me. They get a chance to talk about these things and take it forward, and the point is they have the power to create the change for themselves, instead of it all being taken out of their hands in a way which isn't effective, because it's not as if the people who take it out of their hands are comfortable with conflict, if that's the way that they're dealing with it. It is one of the classic ineffective ways of responding to conflict that never resolves it, to avoid trying to resolve it and just kind of keep people apart. It doesn't work. It means that the problem keeps returning because no one's ever learned how to deal with the problem. So the bulk of what I want to say is what I've just said, is that there's an illusion about bullying, and the illusion is that you can never prove that it exists. Also, the illusion is that by making a bullying complaint that it's ever going to get anywhere, other than that for either you or the other person or both of you to have to leave the organisation after many months of stress. And I think really I just want to say a little bit about what I would also call an illusion, that there will ever be an adequate definition of bullying that could make it a legal thing. If we look at what's going on in the Fair Work Commission in Australia, it's a kind of a noble aim, but less than 10% of cases that come to that commission, which is if you haven't seen about it in one of my other videos about why bullying investigations don't work, and I'm referring to the ACAS guide to bullying and harassment, and there's more information in there. The Fair Work Commission workplace bullying jurisdiction, less than 10% of cases actually come to any kind of conclusion. And when you look at the kinds of conclusions that they come to, and I was watching a video by a lawyer who works within that context the other day. It's a really good video. He does a really good report on what you have to do to go through it, what the possible outcomes might be. It's a really good video. He describes the outcomes of any of the cases that do actually reach any kind of conclusion. And ultimately, they're basically the same kind of outcomes that most organisations come to without having to go through a legal process. It'll be things like sending an employee for counselling or something, or keeping people separate, or moving one person to another department, all of which are ineffective responses to bullying allegations. But it's just that in Australia it's now done through the courts instead of just by the organisation in-house doing the same thing. So it doesn't move anything forward really, because the outcomes are the same. They're still ineffective. It's very likely people are going to leave. In many of the cases that apply for an anti-bullying order, people have left anyway by the time it comes to any conclusion. It does acknowledge that in some cases the situations get resolved by mediation, but in a lot of them, as I say, only less than 10% come to any kind of clear conclusion, and the outcomes are what a lot of organisations in other countries are already coming to as outcomes anyway. But whether they're satisfactory or not, and whether they're effective, and whether it does restore the working relationship or not, it doesn't look like they're the kind of actions that will ever support that being possible. And that's in a country where they have attempted to have a legal definition of bullying, and I would say it doesn't work. Other people might disagree, particularly people who work there. They will not want to say that it doesn't work, but really when you look at the statistics, the kinds of outcomes that are achieved, it doesn't sound like it's working. It doesn't talk about people re-establishing working relationships and being able to continue effectively and perhaps more resiliently now because they've come through the challenge of a difficulty in their working relationship. So the benefits of mediation and conflict coaching are still not being drawn upon as much as they could be even there. And the idea of a legal definition of bullying doesn't seem to be panning out that well. So that's what I want to say. If you disagree strongly with me, please say so in the comments below and maybe dislike the video. If you agree strongly with me, like the video and put that in your comments. If you're not sure, please still give a comment or ask a question. I want to keep raising this issue of this kind of default movement to alleging that bullying has occurred and why it's an ineffective response to difficulties in workplaces. I would much rather we stopped using the term bullying. Well, I say I would much rather. I suppose it doesn't make much difference to me if I'm not the people out there involved in things. I'm more of an observer, but what I'm observing is it doesn't work to try to call things bullying. It gives a false impression, an illusion again, that something constructive will come from it, but actually it doesn't. It would be better to be more specific about what the actual behaviours are that are a problem and talk about them, in recognising that all of these situations are unique, broken or difficult workplace relationships, and each one will need to be able to reform itself. And that's much less costly, it's much less time spent, it's much more actively involving of the people who are in the broken working relationship, rather than leaving them passive and uninvolved and feeling powerless and frustrated, and as I say, with false expectations that a conclusion will be reached when it almost certainly won't be. And I think it's time that we started seeing bullying as the illusion that it is, and that it would be much better when we stop trying to prove things are bullying before we actually take action. Because sometimes when these investigations go ahead and bullying isn't proven, it then becomes suggested, well, nothing needs to be done because it isn't bullying. But the broken working relationship is still either ongoing or people have left the organisation already. So it's a losing approach all round. But I'll leave it there. I'll leave it there because I hope that if you've got viewpoints about this that you'd like to share, that you'll put them in the comments below. If you want to hear more videos about communication and conflict, not just about bullying, as you'll see if you've looked at the other videos on here. It's very generally about effective communication, effective conflict resolution, but I do quite a few on workplace bullying because it's an area that I've done quite a lot of work in, and I've written a book about as well, which you'll see a link to in the information below. Um, yeah, if that's of interest to you. So, thanks very much for watching. Hope you have a good day. I hope if you're experiencing bullying, you found this useful. There is hope, there is a way forward, but it's very unlikely to be through seeking an investigation into bullying. It will be through things like conflict coaching or mediation. So I hope you're able to gain support with that if that's available to you. And if not, please feel free to get in touch because there may be things that I can support you with anyway with that. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Bye bye.